Job. Have y'all noticed the trend of half-breeds around here? Gabriel, Miriam, Malia, Jade. Yeah, we got all kinds of them. I know. All right, let's see. If y'all still have that handout, the analysis of the book of Job, we got into the first test and through the first assembly, and there under B, Roman, I didn't know Roman numeral. The second part of B, the first disasters, that's where we'll be. And a bookmark fell out of my notebook. Let's see here. So we'll be picking up in Job chapter 1, verse number 13. Let's see here. All right, verse number 13. It said, "And there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house." So possibly this could be the same day we talked about before. It looks like they had maybe like we have Sunday dinner and things when families get together. They definitely had a time when they got together, and it looks like it could be like a Sabbath type of thing. They would have known about the day of rest because the Lord rested on the seventh day of creation. So they would have known about that just like they knew about sacrifices when they left the garden. So Job was given these sacrifices. Remember, Job didn't have the law, and he's doing these sacrifices all based on the previous generations and what they've handed down to him. The Lord made their coats of skins out of an animal when Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden. And then when Noah got off the ark, he gave a sacrifice, a burnt sacrifice. So Job was following in the footsteps. So it seems likely that this would maybe be on the same day if they're having this Sabbath day going on, which very likely they did. Then maybe Job had done his morning sacrifice that day, and these kids are meeting and having their family dinner together. And what a shock it would be to hear the things that are coming on the day that Job is doing the right thing. That Job is up probably in prayer. He didn't have a Bible, but he's doing sacrifices. And no doubt the Lord spends time in fellowship and speaking to him in the way that he spoke to them back then. And so it would be definitely a shock, and thinking things are all right and he's blessed and things are going on good between him and the Lord. And so far they had. Job is the wealthiest man. The Lord has definitely shown him some favor and some blessing, had that hedge of protection about him. And it just seems like just another day. And things are going on just normal as always. And then we go to verse 14. "And there came a messenger unto Job and said, The oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them." Verse 15. "And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away." So those Sabeans, we won't run all these references because I want to get through everything today. But in Genesis chapter 25 and 3, talks about how the Sabeans were from Sheba. That's where you get the Queen of Sheba. And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So here Job is. He's in Uz, and that's Edom. I don't want to go to every reference. But in Lamentations chapter 4, verse 21, it tells you that Uz is Edom. And so we know that that's where he's at. And Israel is dwelling there in the south of the Dead Sea during the tribulation. And we talked about how Job, in the book of Job, is a type of the Jew in the tribulation. And so reinforcing the prophetic type of Job and Israel. And this is why most of those who aren't Bible believers, we would call them those that believe in replacement theology, say Job is an allegorized piece of poetry about the Jew going into captivity under Assyria and Babylon. They believe God is finished with the Jew and that the church has replaced the nation of Israel. And there is a lot of our national forefathers that fall under that category. How's the song go? The stomping out, the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. So they believe they were setting up the kingdom here in the New World in the United States. And they weren't, because they believed that the church replaced the Jew, was grafted in. And they don't want to admit that later on God picks back up with the Jew. And then he does, and real quick after he picks back up with them, they go right into the tribulation. So what they do in order to get rid of that, they can't allow Job to be back there at 1800 BC. So they have to find a place where this book fits and a reason to make it not literal and prophetic. So they put it there when the nation of Israel goes into captivity. I don't know why I keep struggling with that one. Captivity under Assyria and Babylon, which is around 700 BC. And so they put him there to say that this is all a not true story. This is all an allegory, just a type or a poetic illustration. Job may have been a real man, they say, but this story was just to represent them going into captivity, which is all male bovine excrement. It just amounts to nothing. It's no good. So what it really is Job is back there 1800 BC. Job was a real man. Job literally lived, and this story of his life is a representation of the Jew in the tribulation once God has picked back up with him and raptured his church out of here. So they changed that date. Let's see here. But definitely it's all through the book of Job. There's so many types and so many hints and so many signs that pop up alluding to the tribulation. Even the setup of the book of Job resembles the New Testament account of the tribulation, which is the book of Revelation. In Revelation, you have the first section that talks about the church. And everything seems to be going pretty good. They have some issues they work on, and there's a fellowship there, much like Job at the first of the book. He's having fellowship with the Lord, but he's having to do some sacrifices just to take care of some sins. Same deal with the church. God points out some sins, and they got to deal with them. And then you have 3 tellings of the tribulation throughout the book of Revelation. Well, that just coincides with the 3 rounds of accusation and debate Job has with his friends. He has the 3 friends, and he goes 3 rounds with each of those friends, except for Bildad. He only goes 2. Then the third part of the book of Revelation is the restoration. And we see the same thing in the book of Job. The third part of the book is when Job gets everything back and God more than restores him. That's the same thing in tribulation. Or in Revelation, God more than restores his creation. He makes a new heaven and a new earth, and it's eternal, and it goes forever. And Job, when he gets restored, not only does he get everything back, but the Lord doubles that thing. He gives him more than what he had to begin with. And so it's a wonderful type in how they coincide together. Satan lets one person get out in time to send the message to Job. And this has been adopted by the world due to its dramatic nature. For only one to survive, doesn't that? I mean, it doesn't seem like a real gripping piece of a story to hear all this bad happened and one person alone survived. There was one alone to stand. So in the world, in the epic tradition, there's one called a refugee, in some cases called the fugitive, and is needed to convey the tidings of what has happened. And you can see copies of this in Hollywood. I remember watching this movie years ago called The Alamo, where it was said that Lewis Rose escaped the night before the final battle. And if any of you are familiar with the Alamo, that's where those terrible Mexicans came in and killed everybody. We probably had it coming. So they come in there and they kill everybody, but the night before, this guy, and they nicknamed him Moses because he was the oldest guy there, and he escaped because he was going for reinforcements and help, but they came in the next day and killed everybody, so he was the one escaped alone to tell the story. And then also we see it with a more recent movie, The 300. In that movie, there's a man called Delios, and he is based on a character which is a little harder to say, probably why they changed his name. Aristodemus, Aristodemus, I think is how you say that. But he was a Spartan who was sent back to Sparta due to an eye injury. And so if you know anything about how the elite Spartan soldiers worked, if you had a flaw to where you couldn't hold up your end of defense for the man next to you, and he would be blind in one eye, so he wouldn't be able to see attack coming from that side. He wouldn't be able to counterattack or block, and it would cause a weakness in the line. And their defenses were in that time were the best that had ever been seen in the world. And so they couldn't allow one chink in the armor. And so we could take a lesson from that as Christians to not allow a chink in the armor. But they sent him back because he had that wound in his eye, and which also 300 is a ripoff of Gideon's 300. But these guys, there's that epic gripping thing of one person alone survives. So you see the devil doing that here in Job to get the news to Job. So, and also there is a progression to the climax. Job's dearest are destroyed last. And Job, as he goes through here, he's losing great wealth. He's the wealthiest man. Back then, it wasn't about trading with a dollar. It wasn't about how much you had in the bank. You didn't have a numerical, monetary representation of your wealth. You had things like B's family in Mexico. They have cows, and that's just how it works. It makes wealth to have a thing. Sometimes the size of our house, proves how wealthy we are, or the expense of the car we drive, or how much money we ridiculously spent on a suit, or something like that, just to show off our wealth. But Job here, he's got wealth and he's losing it. Verse 16. While he was yet speaking, so this just keeps happening while the conversation is going on. The fire of God is, wait, I skipped the line, sorry. There came also another and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep, and the servants, and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So Satan can use things in nature. He uses fire, he uses flood, he uses wind, and he can use it if God allows him to. Let's see how much I got here. I hate not to run the references, but I really don't think I have time. But over in Hebrews, it talks about the fire of God. And it's a fearful thing, that fire, the fire of God. God let's just go look at it. Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, and we'll start at verse 25 through the end of the chapter. All right, see that ye refuse not him that speaketh. For if they escape not who refused him that spake on earth, much more shall not we escape if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven. Whose voice then shook the earth. That's a pretty big deal. Sometimes there's some real heavy thunder, and you can hear the house shake. And then we had that earthquake there a few years ago that shook our house. And that's one thing for the earth to shake. And then look at the rest of the verse. But now he hath promised, saying, yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. Now, that's a whole other thing. You're shaking far more than the earth. You're shaking everything we know, the whole creation. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken. And what's going to happen at the end of the book of Revelation? It's all going to flee away, because the creation itself fears God, even if man doesn't. As of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. So, in this study, I learned that reverence and godly fear are two different things. So now me and B have something to talk about. And in verse 29, where we're headed, for our God is a consuming fire. That's what everything's so scared of. Scared of God. Why? Because God is a consuming fire. And the terror of the Lord, when we stand before Him and we are tried and our works are tried as if by fire. Why? Because God is a consuming fire. And especially us, I include myself definitely, us as Americans, we don't do too well with authority. We're rebellious, we're full of pride, we're arrogant. Sometimes, even in situations at work, I have authorities over me. If I'm out and about, policemen direct traffic or pull you over for whatever they want to, they have the authority, and you're to submit to that authority. And I have problems with that sometimes. It's my what would you call it? My reaction to not do well with authority. But if I took the time to think about it, if I'm a Christian, I shouldn't be reacting. I should be responding to the authority. Even if I'm not in the wrong, let's say I get pulled over and I didn't do anything, and I should still submit to the authority. If he wants to write me a ticket, so be it. I should still submit to the authority. So even creation recognizes the supreme authority of God. Our God is a consuming fire, and even the creation itself trembles in the presence of God. And at one point, it will flee away from Him. It'll run and hide. Why? Because God is just that powerful. And as a Western civilization, we really don't comprehend that too well. We don't comprehend authority. We don't comprehend supreme authority over us. And I've said many times, we just don't comprehend what it is to have a king. And I've read stories and places in the Bible, like there in the book of Esther, you see some examples of it and some hints of it. And I've read other stories and things of over in Asia when they had kings and how they behaved in the presence of a king. Man, we don't get that stuff. We don't understand that. It's a whole nother level of authority. And so we need to remember what our God is. And it's a fearful thing. In Hebrews 10, talking about it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of Him, of our God, the consuming fire that saved us and that we serve, the God of love. He's a consuming fire. That fear should drive a child of God to holiness and fear of sin. So that fear we have should do the right thing to us. It should promote us to do the right thing. Why? Because our God is a consuming fire. We should have a respect, a reverence, a godly fear for that. And because knowing God's nature. Over in 2 Kings, we won't go there. Y'all probably know the story. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 13 is when the captain and his 50 shows up 3 times. And is it Elijah or Elisha? Elijah. And they show up the first time and they just telling him, they do have authority. He is the captain and he has the 50. And they show up, but Elijah has a bigger authority. And they show up and start bossing Elijah around. He says, okay, if I'm a man of God, let fire come down and consume you. Boom. There they go, every one of them fried. So another 50 with their captain shows up and start bossing Elijah around. Come here, man of God. They're mocking him. And he says, okay, if I'm a man of God, let fire come down and consume you. And boom, fried them all again. And then this third guy shows up, and he does it the right way. He understands authority. He understands who really has the authority in this situation. He comes and he's down on his knees. He's saying, oh, man of God. And he does it with respect. Will you please? He asks him. And he's like, and then the Lord tells him, okay, you can go with this guy. So it doesn't bother God at all to kill 50 people to prove a point. He's God. He created us. He is the king. He has the authority. He can do whatever he wants, and we should be glad of it. If it costs me all of my family and he puts me in a bed somewhere and I can't even get out of it, I should be like Job. Blessed be the name of the Lord, because he does what he wants to do, and he has the authority. And then, there's 4 things that happen to Job there. The oxen and asses is the first one. And the servants. We forget about the servants sometimes. There were servants that were taking care of all those, and then the sheep, and there were servants taking care of them. So not only is he losing his wealth, he's losing his labor force too. Let's look at verse number 17. While he was yet speaking, and this conversation just keeps on going. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So the Chaldeans, that's your Babylonians, and they come in here, and what do they go after? They go after camels. And let's see, yeah, there in the second part of the verse, fell upon the camels and carried them away. And the camels and the servants, so they've taken the oxes and the asses. That would be like our machinery today, our tractors to plow and things to haul loads, and that's what that would be. And then he lost the sheep. Well, the sheep would be their means of their eating. That's where they got their wool to make clothing. So their food and their clothing, their raiment, food and raiment. And so now he's losing his camels. And what did they use camels for back then? That's their means of transportation. So they can't get around. And they're going to be looking to take the bus. So because they don't have their camels anymore. And also the servants with them. So more of the labor force. And then we'll look here in verse number 18. Once again, while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not an alcoholic thing. It's just juice. Verse 19, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I alone am escaped alone to tell thee. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So the fourth thing he lost was his children. And we talked about how this loss progresses. You know, if a rich man like Job just lost his oxen and his asses, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. That could be replaced. He probably has some gold laid up somewhere. He could buy more. He could probably trade some and get some and build that back up pretty easy. He lost his sheep. That'd be pretty bad. But once again, he's not at the bottom. He has camels he could trade and get some of that back. And it would be much diminished, but he could still make it. Well, then he lost the camels. So he's lost all that wealth. He's lost everything he had there. And then comes along the fourth thing, his children. So he had the 7 sons and the 3 daughters, and we talked a little bit about how that Gentile number shows up 10, and he loses them all at once. And I never put these together till studying this. But the oxen and the asses were 500 and 500, so you got another 10 showing up there. A loss, like I said, a loss, but not too bad. Then you have the 3,000 sheep and the 7,000 camels, another 10. And so it's getting pretty rough. And then 7 sons, 3 daughters, the 10. So Job lost his ability to do work with the oxen and asses. And with the sheep, his ability to feed and clothe. With the camels, his ability to get around. And then with his children, the reason for his abilities, the reason for his wealth. The influencers say you have to figure out your reason, your why you do things, your purpose. Even if these children were only Job's ability to pass on his wealth, and his wife was his reason, even then he still loses her too, if only in her allegiance. So we notice that the fire of God shows up, and the great wind shows up, and these things are under God's control. And keep in mind, Job doesn't know what's going on. This is all happening to him, but he sees the things that are coming and happening, and he sees the tools that are being used. This is a strange whirlwind. It hits all 4 corners of his house, of the house of the children are in. And we need to see this. Let's go to Nahum chapter 1. That's one of those books I should have put a mark in. If somebody gets there before me, go ahead and start reading verse number 1 through 3. Because that's a little one. Nahum chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. Anybody? Go ahead. Yep. 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 So there you go. The Lord is in control of the weather, and God has complete control over it. So as Job is seeing these I guess you could call them armies, these bandits coming in and taking things, you could blame that off on the devil. You could say the devil was behind that. But Job is also seeing the whirlwind and the fire falling from heaven. Well, there's only one person in control of that stuff. Even if he does give the devil permission to do it, Job knows ultimately they were permitted to do that thing. So once again, right here in Nahum, we see God is jealous, and he revengeth. And he revengeth and is furious, and will take vengeance on his adversaries. And he reserveth wrath for his enemies. That's that consuming fire we were talking about earlier. And the only reason that this world doesn't fear him like we should, and most of us Christians don't fear him like we should, is there in verse 3. The Lord is slow to anger. And that's the problem. Because, how's it go in Ecclesiastes? Is not executed speedily. We get a little bold, don't we? Because we don't get our chastisement right then, and we think it's all okay. The Lord's forgot about it. I remember when I was little, and we'd go to the store. Back then, we'd go every week to Rose's. And I remember looking at that big rack of wooden toy guns, with I don't think they popped caps or anything, but they just looked cool, and I always wanted one. But if we did something, we acted out, we did something we shouldn't do, my dad would say, I owe you when we get home. And I knew what that meant. And I was like, man, you talk about dreading something. I mean, the rest of the trip to the store, I didn't care about the guns no more. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to go eat. I just dread that thing. Because I knew he would eventually. And then we get home, long ride home, and that's all I'm thinking about in the back of the car. Gosh, I'm going to get a whooping when I get home. And then we get home and go to the bedroom, and bedtime rolls around. You get your PJs on, and then it's like, he ain't said nothing. Maybe it's okay. And you get a little more bold, and your energy's starting to come back, and your bubbly personality's starting to come back, and you're running around the house, maybe being a little too loud, and maybe I pulled my sister's hair, poked her in the eye or something. You're getting bold again. You're getting back to normal. Because it wasn't executed speedily, That consuming fire didn't show up like it said it was when we got back home. And then after we're done and in the bed and been tucked in and all the lights are out, but maybe their bedroom light and the living room light or the kitchen light, so you still see that glow coming in your door. And then you hear him coming down the hall, and then you hear that sound of that leather flapping the belt loops. And he walks in, and the buckle's clanging, and you're tightening up. And he's like, I hadn't forgot. And sometimes he would just step in and have it in his hand and say, I hadn't forgot. Sometimes he would take care of it that night, but then sometimes he'd let it go for a week. And just every few days or so, he'd walk by at bedtime. I owe you one. I hadn't forgot. Man, you talk about rough. And then finally it come around time to pay, and it stunk. But I learned that just because it's not executed speedily doesn't mean it ain't going to happen. So, yeah, that's how I grew up. And it works. We're going to have to stop there. But that completes, we didn't get through what I wanted to get through. But that completes back to the analysis. That completes the first disasters. And next time, Lord willing, we'll get into Job's first reaction. I think that's when we start to learn something about how we should be as Christians. And we'll stop right there. Lord, we thank you, Father, for being with us.